Welcome to the inaugural episode of Founders Table. This podcast is focused on conversations with current founders to deconstruct their lessons and tactics in order to help you build your own startup. If you like this podcast, don't forget to rate and subscribe in your podcast app. This will keep you up to date on latest episodes, as well as help others find out about the show. My guest today is Daniela Miao, co-founder of Momento, the real-time data platform. Momento makes it easy for engineers to add distributed caching and real-time PubSub with just a few lines of code. Prior to Momento, Daniela was a tech lead at AWS DynamoDB and the director of platform engineering at Lightstep. In today's episode, we talk about a team-first approach to building a startup, pivoting from B2C to B2B, and being a parent while also running a business. Now, without further ado, I give you Daniela Miao. Daniela, welcome to Founders Table. Glad to have you on.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me. Excited for today's conversation.
So I want to start off with learning a little bit about your origin story and how you got into tech and kind of what led you to eventually end up doing a startup.
Yeah, of course. I studied computer science in school, so I think landing in tech is no surprise to people. But actually, for myself, I did take a detour. I went to grad school for technology policy because I wanted to sort of lean into technology impact on society and kind of broaden my horizons beyond just tech. I'm originally from Canada, so actually after grad school, it was a lot easier to land a job in tech as a foreign national. So I joined Amazon, and I always sort of had this desire though to do something that's like more directly impactful, and I got a lot of that in Amazon. I was on a team called DynamoDB, shipped a bunch of features, worked directly with customers in the infrastructure space. At the time, was a lot of customers struggling with traditional databases and wanting to switch to more scalable, more available NoSQL databases like Dynamo. So I could feel the impact, but I was still a part of a very, very big corporation. So a startup felt like somewhere where I could work across the different functions and really be a part of the growth story for the company. So I joined a really small startup at the time, about 10 people in San Francisco in 2016. And I was there for over 4 years and really saw the kind of acceleration and some of the really great milestones at the company. A company's called Lightstep. It's since been acquired by ServiceNow, by a much bigger company. But it really inspired me. It sort of affirmed my belief that a smaller company and an entrepreneurial journey where I could go through self-growth as well as find ways for me to sort of leave a mark, so to speak. So that's kind of what drove me to start Momento with my co-founder, Quadra, who we worked together at Amazon. I think we always had the same desires, and we have very similar values in, what we want to achieve in our careers. So it was very natural alignment after I left Lightstep. We decided to do this together.
Got it. And a lot to unpack there. I guess first starting off when you were at Amazon. So I also used to be at Amazon. I'm sure we know lots of people there that, once you start and you're comfortable at a big tech company like that, it becomes really hard to leave. What was there any specific moment or kind of triggering point that made you decide this was the right time to leave Amazon and join the startup?
I think it was always on my mind. At the time, I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I felt like I was very fortunate and privileged to have access to a lot of startups. And I think it's sort of, my own choice. And it's sort of to each their own. I definitely, again, coming from like a foreign national background and being on a visa, I definitely have a lot more friends who are in similar positions who choose the more stable, you know, sort of well-shaped corporate path, whether it's, you know, Meta or Google or Amazon. And I think that's perfectly fine. And like I said, I have a lot of good friends who chose that path. For me, I just always felt like that I like to be a little more creative with how I leave an impact. I like to carve out my own path. And I learned a lot at Amazon, and I'm like forever thankful for a lot of the structure and the big organization way of doing things. Because you know they're a very successful company that went through its own evolution over the years. So a lot of the lessons learned there are still valuable at a small company. But it's about you know my role, what I can do, and what I'm expected to do, and that sort of pre-structured corporate, you know, whether it's on the engineering IC path or on the management path, that kind of like leveling up was never that attractive to me. You know, I cared about a lot more things beyond that, and I'm having a blast. I mean, I had a blast at Lightstep, you know, working with marketing, sales, customer success, just sort of working across the board, right? Nobody really looks at your role description and kind of, you know, expects you to do one thing and one thing only. And I really enjoy that. And I think for the listeners or anybody in the audience who also crave it, or at least is remotely curious about it, I definitely think it's a really good experience to at least try. And what I told myself, Kevin, was, you know, if I don't end up liking it because grass is always greener on the other side, or you know, or if like it's not a good fit for the lifestyle that I want, then Amazon's always going to be there. It'll still be there if I change my mind. so, so I felt really comfortable leaving, taking that leap, and then if I didn't like it, I knew that I could always join my old team and still have a blast with my old teammates. But you know, fortunately, I really did really love it, and kind of have never looked back ever since.
How did you mentioned, when you were at Amazon, you had a colleague, Waja, who is now your co-founder, and sharing similar values. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about that, like what kind of like what those values were, and yeah, like what gave you the confidence that he was going to be the right person for you to do this startup together.
Yeah, so he was actually the head of engineering at AWS DynamoDB. So he was my boss. Um, so in a way, I really aspired to be more like him, to lead like him. So from the get-go, I knew I would learn a lot from him. Um, but you know, as it turns out, as co-founders, you really absorb a lot from each other. So there's a lot to take away, and we're very complementary in a lot of ways. He's very bold with his vision. He thinks really big, and inspires me to do so. And I, on the other hand, I'm much more execution driven. I'm a little bit more organized. I like to have a plan. But sometimes when you get sort of bogged down with the plan and the execution, you do lose the bigger picture. So I think he really helps me that way. In terms of the value alignment, you know, early on, having worked together really helps because you've seen them professionally, you've seen how they conduct themselves as a leader. And beyond that, I think we did talk a lot about the reason why we're doing a startup together. You know, um, some of the fundamental values around, you know, do we form the team first? Do we come up with the idea first? Um, you know, how long do we keep trying an idea before we give up? Because that can be pretty difficult, actually. You know, and when we did pivot. We did go through sort of a few different things together. And I think it's actually not about succeeding together. It's about going through like mini failures or even like bigger than mini failures together that really kind of affirms our belief in our compatibility as co-founders. Because I think it's really easy to get along when things are going well. But it's through the hard times that you really figure out like, okay, like we're in this together. We value the same things. And there's also very, very real, concrete goals to talk about. Like, what does a potential exit look like? Would we be okay with, like failing altogether versus, sort of like an acquisition, things like that. It seems very far out, but it's important to talk about these things early on, and we did talk a lot about that to ensure that we were aligned.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, in general, I think it applies to all relationships. I think like being the co-founder relationship is just very special just because you go through such a long period of very intense time together. And in terms of like failures, I find like failures are far more frequent in startups than successes. And so being able, even if you have a successful startup, you end up dealing with a lot of maybe not failures, but essentially hardship along the way. So being able to go through that is super important. And I guess so. I saw like on one of your other interviews, I think on Elk, you mentioned like when you were doing the startup, you were kind of focused on like a team first approach versus idea first. And could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of need everything. Like, don't get me wrong. Of course, you need to be committed to an idea, a product, a market. We are building a business after all. But I think for us, one of the biggest reasons to work at a startup or to be an entrepreneur is that you have almost complete control, not always, but almost complete control over who you get to work with. Because at least for the initial founding team, you have to handpick and recruit and hire these people. And for the most part, people are not joining the company for an idea or a product because I think they all know that those things can evolve um, according to how the market reacts. So they are joining because of you and because of each other. And I think one of the biggest things that we wanted to solidify early on is who you hire really lays the foundation for the culture and the values alignment. So that's just one of the first things we hire for. I mean, we're an infrastructure startup, so we knew we had to hire the initial engineering team, the founding engineering team. So we really talked about sort of the traits of the types of engineers that we want, and we didn't want the same type either. You definitely want a wide diversity. So we actually talked extensively about that, right? For every new person we bring onto the team, we have to ask, what are they bringing to the table? How are they diversifying our thought? Making us a more wholesome team. And then, of course, a lot of the time you do have to have a commitment because people want to hear, hey, what am I joining you to work on? So definitely did have an idea. In fact, we had funding for the actual idea. But honestly, if your investors and you are on good terms and they believe in your mission, that product itself has to be flexible, right? It has to be evolving. And our product has evolved quite a bit since the early days of us fundraising. So that's kind of how we think about it. And I also think that it can be completely different the other way. Like I know multiple founders who are like super big domain experts in something. And so they have an idea and they're very committed to it and they have a mission. And then they sort of go and try to recruit the team around that mission and that idea. And I think that is totally fine. In fact, sometimes I wish we had started with something like that as well, because it's a lot easier if you're already latched onto something rather than kind of continuously pivoting to try to find that thing, which, we did find in the end, but, it's very efficient if you already have something in mind.
Yeah, it works great if you have something in mind, and what you have in mind also is good with the market,
Yeah.
or product market fit, if you will. But yeah, let's talk about that. You Momento currently, you're back in the infrastructure space, but you didn't start off that way. Initially, I believe you launched in the consumer space. Can you talk me through kind of how you came up with the initial idea and at what point you decided that that was no longer going to work?
Um, we started the company late 2020, so peak of the pandemic. Still was very much spending a lot of time at home, very sedentary lifestyle. I felt like my health was declining as a result. So, we started this like social Zoom exercise happy hour with a lot of my close friends, and it was very effective because of the accountability and a little bit of like social interaction that you get as a result. So that was also like very deeply felt with Quadra. So we actually decided to start in the consumer fitness space, specifically a cross between social network and exercise. So like a more collaborative, less competitive version of Strava is really how we were thinking about it. And actually, we had some initial successes with the beta release. We were partnering specifically with organizations and corporates that wanted to organize these sorts of social exercise events with their organization, right? So you basically had these existing demand and existing groups that could just like enroll their entire group in a certain social challenge. So we had things like Steps Challenge, Scavenger Hunt, that got people moving a little bit more, and it was sort of targeted towards people who aren't already regularly getting off their couches and their work desks. Um, so I still genuinely believe in the domain, and I have a lot of passion for that idea. But it was clear that it was going to be a longer journey. Neither of us have any background in consumer or social or fitness or app building. But I think we were still having a lot of fun, and we did recruit several engineers to work on it with us. And again, these people join, I think, because of who we are, not because of the specific idea. So actually, most of them stuck with us after the pivot. The pivot itself was actually quite natural for us as we got to building the app and the backend for it. We just gravitated naturally to solving some of the backend problems because that's where we came from. We were operating our own database and our own backend servers. And, of course, being a social fitness app, there's a lot of components of interactivity. So we wanted to cache, some basic user metadata, some basic like exercise data to kind of show like a real time, updated screen. And a lot of that was quite painful, more painful than we thought it should be for somebody who's really just focused on app building and the app experience. And because we built Dynamo, and Dynamo in a way kind of is sort of a way to scale out traditional databases into more of a cloud service, right? They give you an endpoint, and as a developer, what's the language that you speak? Well, it's really through web APIs. So you basically just call the DynamoDB APIs, and you can call it once a second or you can call it a million times a second, right? So as your application grows, you really don't have to think about what happens to your database at all if you're on Dynamo, because it's sort of guaranteed that it'll just scale with you. That really I think solved a whole category of traditional problems where you had to keep upgrading the instance size of your Postgres or MySQL database. A problem that many companies still struggle with today, which is why I think DynamoDB is still in business and growing every year. So a very similar concept can be applied to caching, which is very similar to database. It's just that usually people set up their database first and then they think about caching. But the same category of problem of having to update your instance size as the traffic goes up, because if the traffic on your database goes up, the traffic load on your cache will also go up. So we were using Dynamo, and we didn't have that issue with the database, but we did have that issue with the cache. And we were running really lean. We hadn't raised money, so we didn't have like a big operations team. Like we were our own operators, so we could feel the pain, right, of having to maintain and manage and kind of patch these infrastructure. And I think it was very natural for us to be like, hey, we could build that. Actually, I think we're in a really good position to build it because a lot of the concepts we were trained to operate sort of uh, high availability mission critical services from our AWS days. So that's what we ended up sort of pivoting to. And like I said, most of the team stuck with us. They could feel the pain points themselves. So they believed in the team, they believed in the product. And we were very fortunate to have also, pitched to a few investors and got them on board. And that's how we got started with the Momento that we currently are today, the infrastructure platform version of it.
Got it. And just for people who might not be familiar with what caching is, how would you just what's a simple description you would use for the layperson?
Yeah, I mean, really simply, the entirety of an application's data is usually stored in a traditional database. I mentioned a few already: Postgres, MySQL, DynamoDB, and that's usually stored on disk. And what it's optimizing for is durability, right? You never want to lose the data of your users or your metadata about your app. So that's what it's built for. Every time you make a write to your database, you expect it to be there forever until you intentionally delete it or archive it. The point of a cache is to provide fast and interactive and to sort of take load off your database. Databases, because of the fact that it's on disk, aren't really designed to be written to, many million times a second or really read from many million times a second, right? So if you put that cache layer that stores your data, a subset of your data usually, because memory is more expensive than disk, that's essentially what it is. It's that layer usually on top of your database that takes load off of your database and provides much faster access, which actually is becoming more and more important today. We talk about the web, the evolution with the revolution, I should say, with mobile apps, right? Like people are on their phones all the time, and attention span's really, really short. Like you expect apps to get faster, not slower, which means things have to load almost instantly. They have to load really before you even know that you want to navigate to a certain page. So a lot of that information needs to be readily available inside memory, inside a cache, so that you're not having to go all the way to your database, search through, terabytes, petabytes of data on disk, which is way too slow. And as many app builders will tell you, latency on the app causes revenue loss. Right? It hurts conversions, whether you're a subscription model or sort of an ads model, then it hurts user engagement. So there's a direct correlation between bad performance and loss of revenue, and conversely, a direct correlation between better performance, better interactivity, and more revenue.
That makes sense. I think it's one of the constants moving forward is can't tell you what's going to happen in AI or in general most things, but generally people will want better performance and yeah, speedier apps. And in your case, when you pivoted to caching, did you know that this was something that there was a market for? Like, what gave you the confidence to essentially build a business around caching?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely had to do some market research in order to convince ourselves and the investors that there's an actual market and there's a real business, a profitable business to be built here. And in fact, the market is actually it's huge. So there's two parts to it. You could look at the existing market. Um, so businesses like AWS Elasticache, Redis Labs, the various caching offerings at the cloud providers, including Google Cloud and Azure. Um, and even though they don't have public data on the size of those businesses and services, you can always kind of glean it from their case study pages, their blog pages, and just the amount of people that discuss these services on the internet, right? So there's some projections there. Um, And then beyond that, so that's the existing market, right? You're really having to talk about going after people who currently use an existing caching solution, and you're looking to sort of displace or expand their usage by bringing them onto our platform, onto Momento. But really, I think one of the biggest advantages, one of the biggest differences working at DynamoDB and talking to some of the customers is that by making it more available and easier to scale and sort of hands-free management, like they don't have to think about the management, you're lowering the barrier to entry a lot, right? People who previously would just, I don't know, live with the pain or procrastinate upgrading the instance types, and a lot of that kind of results in their application slowing down or having occasional outages all the time. I think we're all familiar with those like website maintenance windows where you go to log into your bank or something and it happens to be like down because they're maintaining their backend databases or whatever. That gets completely eliminated with DynamoDB. And really, what you see with Dynamo at a lot of organizations is that you see new usage, right? You're really expanding the market because of lowering the barrier to entry. So that's a big part of our analysis as well with the market is like, with this new technology and the sort of one API call to basically create a cache, and then you can just cache all the data you want inside it, you're really expanding the usage of this. And we had some sort of, anecdotal, but very, very salient evidence of this from working with the caching engineer, the principal caching engineer at Twitter, or X, I should say. She's no longer there, but she did run caching for Twitter for over 10 years. Yao. She's an advisor to Momento. And we had worked with her, and she told us literally the same thing. Like she went through certain automation and management processes that helped make the internal provisioning and management of Twitter caching clusters much easier. And she did see an uptick in the number of developers that chose to use the technology because it was just easier, it was more readily available. And there, she didn't automate the whole thing. Really, what she did is that she had like an intake Terraform form that the template that made it easier to kind of launch clusters and tear it down. And even that incremental step in itself increased adoption of caching overall. So yeah, it's not just about really competing with the existing market, which is already huge. For us, it's really about expanding usage. And then actually now that we're a platform, we're expanding beyond caching. So what happens is, when you enter the market, customers will ask you for other things, and then we have to assess whether that aligns with our vision. Well, turns out, what do people use for caching a lot? They use Redis a lot. What else do they use Redis a lot for PubSub? So that was kind of a natural market for us to tackle. So now we have quite the footprint in PubSub as well, in our second product line called Momento Topics.
Yeah, and in terms of expanding the market, it reminds me of the Uber story of like, what is the demand for like taxi cabs or private cabs? And this idea, well, if you make it so seamless, so easy, then basically everyone in the world can be like the potential customer. And I think there's a similar shift in like platform infrastructure. Whenever you lower the barrier, you get more adoption. I guess one thing that's curious is, you mentioned like caching. There were already these players. There's AWS and Google and Redis. So I guess the second part is there is a market, but what gave you the confidence of essentially competing in a market that already had these big players? Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really have to think about taking baby steps. Like for us, right, you start with zero revenue, and you kind of have the second player advantage of really you have nothing to lose. And you can take all the lessons that you've observed in the market, because it is a lot harder to change an existing product that's bringing in, millions of dollars in revenue. So, we're talking about the existing players in infrastructure. So not only can we bring some of the innovations, right, around scalability, availability, the lack of management or the hands-free management. So we can put that into our product, but also we really don't need, you know, tens, hundreds of millions in revenue, which is what these companies have, right? We're really trying, you're trying to go from $0 in revenue to a million to 5 million to 10 million, right? So like each step of the way, it is a step function. It is a challenge. So really the big players are not going to notice you at the very beginning. So we're just trying to, we're trying to focus on the first few step functions. And there's the market is huge. So there's always companies that's looking for, like I said, bigger, better, cheaper, right? So I think for us, we were never afraid, and I really don't think we're competing against the big players. I think what any founder should really be thinking about is which other founders might be in adjacent or similar areas. I think companies of similar stage compete much more with each other than a startup and like Amazon, for instance. I think the day that Amazon considers you to be a competition, I mean, we joke about this all the time because we're definitely not there yet, but that means you've made it. Like that definitely means the company is quite successful at that point. So
Yeah, that's a good problem to have, if you will.
yeah, exactly. It's a problem you want to have.
Do you remember your first customer for Momento as a caching service, and how were you able to acquire and onboard them?
So we actually don't have one first customer. We had two design partners that onboarded onto Momento around the same time, which again, like, is a very fortunate, very very fortunate thing that we were blessed with. One of them is Wise Labs. They build security cameras, so you might find them at Costco or Amazon. I'm a loyal Wise customer even before they were a customer of Momento. Just like personally, I use a lot of Wise cameras. It's what I use actually for my baby. It's my baby monitor as well. Um, and that one, we had some. There, the founders are also ex Amazon, so we kind of met through that network. We didn't know each other at all though. We kind of just met and connected, and we are talking about our idea. They have some infrastructure pains, both with management and with spend. So, we were sort of helping them with optimizing their DynamoDB table a little bit. And in that discovery process, and we weren't trying to sell them anything. Like, to be honest, our product wasn't even ready. We were just really gathering feedback on what types of pain points exist out there in the wild. So, but in that process, we discovered a lot of their use cases, how the workflow was working, and we identified areas where they could cache in order to both increase their app's availability and performance and save money, because not as many writes and reads would go to their backend databases. So once we identified that, I think it was just a matter of like writing up the proposal, talking to their CEO and CTO, and getting the proposal accepted at a certain price point. And actually, up until that point, we were very transparent with the fact that the product isn't built and it's not ready, but we intend to build it. And I think it's actually critically important to have a real world use case to serve as the requirements for building the product, to ensure that we were actually building it for somebody who could benefit from it. And then again, like I said, we had a second customer who's Paramount CBS Video, the video team there. Again, very, very fortunate to land a big name, which is difficult, especially for an early stage startup. And that's thanks to a lot of our, specifically Quadras previous network at Amazon. They are a very loyal AWS customer. So I think there, and you really do, I think early on, have to really utilize your network. I'm not saying go sell to everybody that you are connected to on LinkedIn, but I think people genuinely care about founders and are curious when you start a company. And we were very, like I said, very open about what problem we want to solve. And we were really just going in with a discovery mindset to learn and talk to their engineers. And they actually did have a lot of pain managing their Elastic Cache cluster. I think one year they had over 12 outages. So that's over one outage per month. So there's clear pain there. And again, very similarly, we work with them, we discover the use case, gather the requirements, figured out a solution that could serve both, WISE and CBS, which again, very important early on, making sure you're not building your product just for one customer that can't be sold to other customers. So we have those two. And then in the span of, I would say, around 6 to 9 months, we were able to onboard some of their alpha workloads in a testing environment. And then 3 months after that, everybody went to prod. So that helps a lot, right? That snowball effect. Once you have a few logos, big recognizable logos who are running on you in production, then you can go and sell it to the third and the fourth and the fifth customer. That's kind of how we went about it.
Yeah, that's an amazing start and great design partners you have in the very beginning as well. Um, Today, like you've now moved past your fifth, you've moved far beyond your fifth customer. I guess to give people an idea, like where is Momento now in terms of, I guess, like team and distribution and size?
Yeah, so Momento is still fully remote. Actually, my co-founder lives in the Portland area. I live in the Seattle area, so we don't really have plans to have like one central location. Although we do have, physical WeWork offices at some of the hubs we have, mostly across the West Coast. So it's Seattle, Portland, Bay Area, and San Diego is where a bulk of our engineering team is located. And then we have, sales and marketing folks across the United States and in Japan. Actually, we have a pretty formidable Japan team as well. In total, not excluding the contractors, so like full-time employees, we're around 30 right now. We grew pretty fast, but also we want to be deliberate with how we scale. Um, so that's kind of the stage that we're at. Just trying to double down on our sales motion. The thing that I said, right? Trying to build up the snowball now that we have sort of a handful of customers who we're very proud of. We're just trying to sort of roll that into more and more customers. We have a big presence in gaming as well. Gaming, sort of hits all the points that you care about: high performance, high interactivity, low latency. Also like very, very quick to market. Like if you want to build something and ship it really, really fast, you want to not have to worry about the back end and load testing and benchmarking and game day testing and all that. So yeah, we're just heads down right now, focused on that repeatable sales motion, trying to show revenue numbers before our next round, before our next fundraising round. But yeah, we're super optimistic, feeling really, really good about the momentum that we've gained so far.
Yeah, I feel like there's something you can do with that momentum
Yeah, I know. Every
moving
time I say
forward.
that word now. And it's funny because Momento is actually a word that we used for the consumer fitness app, but it's very, very fitting for caching as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. It was meant to be. You talk about repeatable sales motion. I think that is like the once you get a product out, that is basically the priority of everything of single founder is how do you get a repeatable sales motion. What are you doing today, and is there anything that's been working particularly well?
Yeah, I think we're still figuring it out. Like, to be clear, we're definitely not at the stage where it's like, oh, we've made it and, everything is working and Quadra and I can go hands off. We definitely still join. Quadra and I both still join a lot of sales calls, especially Quadra. He's much more on top of go to market. I mainly oversee engineering, which takes up a lot of time already. But something that's been working is, we do work very closely with our sales leader. We meet multiple times a week to build that playbook, and it's literally a playbook. Like it's literally whether it's a Notion or a spreadsheet somewhere or a Google Doc somewhere. It's literally like, okay, here are all the challenges and objections that you're going to run into. So for us in infrastructure, going to be like, oh, we don't have time to move databases or caching right now. We don't have any issues. you're a small startup and it's too much risk to use you instead of AWS, right? Like you have to have very convincing responses to all of those. And people are always going to say no before they say yes. I think that's most people's reaction when they're dealing with a new thing or a new vendor, because, it is effort to have to switch tools. Let alone like an entire infrastructure, which is the foundation of your entire application. So I think just investing in those multiple times a week meetings with the sales team to really train them on how to talk about especially the challenges and the objections that come up, and being diligent about writing that down, because we've hired like 3 new sales folks in the past 6 months, and each of them needs to be ramped up, right? And we need to somehow get away from founder-led sales because that's just not scalable. So yes, we land at Wise Labs. Yes, we land at Paramount CBS because of Quadra and I, but we need to be able to land like triple the amount of that, or 10x the amount of that, without relying on Quadra and I all the time. So a lot of it is just about replicating ourselves, and we're not the best salespeople either, and also learning from some of the more experienced sales leaders that we've met. But yeah, I think the thing that's been a really big takeaway for us is that there are things that we can do that the experienced sales leader just cannot do. And we have to be able to extract that and pass it on to the sales team. And then there are things that we don't know that the sales leaders have to teach us, like, MetPick and the sales process. And it's really important for the founders to be humble in that regard, to say, okay, this is where I have to defer to your judgment and let you do it. But ultimately it's our company, and we're in the driver's seat, and we're responsible for ensuring that we're finding success along the way. So I think it's important for the founders to follow their intuition and build their sales team that's more suitable for their product. I don't think there's like a one size fits all sales team. Even in the world of infrastructure SaaS, like I don't like our sales leader is coming from MongoDB, right? Like a lot of similarities, but also like, not everything he did at Mongo is going to work at Momento.
It makes sense. Um, I want to take a non sequitur now, and you are not just a startup founder, but you are also a parent, and I think both of those goals are like enormous full time goals that people struggle with. What is have you found any kind of like routines or habits or anything that how do you cope with essentially managing being both a founder and a parent?
Well, I think first of all, uh, people always talk about balance, right? Like there's really no balance. I think on both fronts, you have to feel like you're deliberately choosing. So like I choose to spend time with my kid, or I choose to be at work while my kid is, elsewhere, either with a parent, a grandparent, or at daycare. I think that like finding that balance is like kind of a misnomer on a day-to-day basis. Like every day you have to wake up and decide where you're choosing to be. That said, it's actually not that hard for me personally. And again, I think maybe I'm in a privileged position to be able to say this, but like I truly enjoy being a parent and being a founder. Like, with all the challenges that comes with being a startup founder, I would not choose to be elsewhere right now in my career, right? I love my team. I have a high amount of respect for everybody that I work with, especially for Quadra. I'm learning every day. I do feel like I'm becoming a better engineer, a better leader, a better manager every day, because of other things that people are teaching me. So I think if you do truly enjoy both of those roles, then I think there's there's not a lot of downsides to it. Um, there's definitely difficult days, right? Like you were telling me about, barely getting any sleep last night. Like there's physical limitations that's difficult. So one of the things in the past year, my kid is a little over 1, so I think the first year was really tough for us. one of the things that I had to accept is that like I simply cannot work as many hours as I did pre kiddo. Um, like going back to work after the kid goes to bed is kind of like a normal happenstance for us now. But there are nights where I'm just so exhausted that I cannot do it, and it's okay, right? I have to be have to be okay with that, and I am okay, much more okay with it now because I realize that if I burn out, then I have to take many more days off in order to sort of come back from that. And that's a lot more impactful for my company and for my team than if I'm sort of consistently productive at work just every day for, a few less hours than before. So I think part of it is just like choosing, like I said, like making it a choice, not something that you feel like, oh, I cannot work and that's like such a shame or whatever. Like I choose to spend more time with my kids at night and spend more time kind of recharging at night. And on weekends as well. Unless there's some, urgent deadlines or something that I really need to get pushed out for a customer, I choose to be a parent on the weekend. But yeah, it's actually I know it might be difficult for you, like like we said at the beginning, when you have like one of those like sleepless nights, it's really, really difficult. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It does get easier as the kid gets older as well. And I think just that shift in mentality is it's really all psychological for me.
Yeah, I think I agree 100% with the it's better to take the long term, like rest for the night. It's better to take a day break versus burn out and lose a week or a month. And it's funny, I think every parent I've talked to has, said something of the sentiment of it gets better. I think, every parent tells like new generations of parents kind of like this is it will get better. Um, Right. I think there's so much more I want to ask you, but we are getting close to the end of the show, and I want to transition now to a set of closing questions that I ask my guests. And first, I want for founders that might be doing a startup now, or maybe you thinking of yourself when you first started, do you have any advice or lessons that you would want to impart on them?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't know if I'm at the position of giving advice yet. But I guess I can talk about things I wish I knew sort of early on. The macroeconomics has shifted a lot since we've raised money. And I actually think it's good because it's forcing founders to run a lot leaner teams and think a lot more about where to deploy capital. So I think that's one takeaway is I think early on we were kind of riding on the high of the economy and the tech boom, and it felt really easy to sell. Like people had budget, they had money, they were willing to talk to new vendors. So I think that for founders now, I think it's even more important to really think about your cost of acquisition, like cost of user acquisition, right? So be a little more diligent about your capital and your gross margins, because I do think it matters a lot more now. I did not learn a lot of the financial terms or even bother to look at our books every month. And now, like, I'm learning and I'm trying to be a little more literate on the books and the financial terms as well. And we have a really great sort of a part-time CFO person that we work with. And we sit down with him every month to kind of go through the books and to learn about that. Because like ultimately, I think that's a basic skill as an entrepreneur is to understand the expenses of your business and the revenue, and ensure that you're kind of trending towards profitability. Which the venture backed startup, I understand that the first few years is not like that, but I will say that I feel like in this economy, it matters a lot more than it did, 3 years ago. So,
Agreed. And I mean, a startup founder wears many hats, but at the end of the day, it's if you can't make payroll, then you don't have a company. So it's Definitely, yeah, a necessity. When you think of success, is there anybody or that comes to mind?
You know, this was one of the preparation questions that you had prompted me beforehand when I was thinking about it. Um, and there's a lot of like successful entrepreneurs, of course, that I respect. But I don't think it would be very genuine of me to tell you a specific name because I just don't think about my own journey that way. My own journey is a lot more about self-growth and like I've never been a very competitive person growing up, if you will, like, going to school, getting good grades. And I think my parents maybe also raised me this way. It's always about finding a better version of myself, right? So like it was never about that I wanted to be like ranked first in my class. I never cared about any of that. It's always about like, am I taking something away from, losing these points on a test or something, right? So like we talk about retros a lot in tech, right? Like that's a favorite part of the process for me. So when it comes to success, there really isn't like, oh, I want to be like this person or like I have many role models in my life and I aspire many aspects of them, but I don't want to be like them, right? I just want to be waking up every day and feeling like that I'm taking something away and I'm actually like internalizing the lessons. I'm internalizing feedback I'm getting from others. And that enables me to be a better version of myself. So kind of, I think I hope that when I look back, 5 years from now, I can be proud of my achievements, and I think that's the most important thing to me in terms of achieving success.
Yeah. So the person 5 years from now that you will become that has, done retros and
Hopefully,
learned.
hopefully, yeah, that's the aspiration.
Next question: how do you recharge? Yeah, after a tough day, either parenting or work. What do you do to get your energy back up?
I mean, I think I mentioned this a little bit. Like recharging from work is really just parenting. Recharging from parenting is, probably like a social gathering, just hanging out with friends. I try to have a really, really regular exercise regime now. It helps a lot, especially post birth with the recovery physically and everything. I go to a gym regularly, have a really nice coach, very motivational. And then I do a lot of rock climbing. I also have a really great group of friends who we go together. And yeah, it's just, little hobbies that you pick up here and there.
Definitely. Any recent small investments in the last year that has made an outsized impact for you?
Um, I think for me, it is getting into this regular exercise regime. Um, I mean, I kind of had it pre-birth, but I didn't really need it. But I think postpartum, just getting into a habit of being active is really, really important. Again, just for physical recovery. And then, like I said, I've discovered that it provides a lot of mental rejuvenation as well. So uh, it is pretty small, like twice a week. It's not that much commitment actually, but I think just overall, it's made me like a much stronger, both mentally and physically person. So yeah, I definitely recommend it.
Yes, I agree. I can't function if I don't exercise at least sometime in the day. But I think for me, it's become more of like it's like coffee, or like imagine people needing cigarettes. It's uh, anyways,
Yeah,
that's neither
don't
here or
don't
there.
get addicted to it. But try to look for opportunities. Like the one thing that's really funny, like I used to hate yard work, but ever since I feel like my body has really kind of declined physically postpartum, I've actually like enjoyed getting out into our yard and mowing the lawn or something like physical activity because I think a lot of the time driving a startup is like very mentally taxing, but physically not demanding enough. So you kind of switch that with yard
Yeah,
work. So,
definitely. All right. And last question. Ask or offered, is there anything you would like to request from the audience, or talk about before we close out for today?
I think we're in the business of selling and helping with infrastructure pain points, so we're still figuring it out. Like I said, I would love to learn a little bit more if the audience are in tech about the sorts of issues that you see with your application, whether it's like performance related, like things are slow, or things take a long time, things are down all the time, things are too expensive. Please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn or, reach out to Kevin for my contact. I think it's too easy to get stuck building a product and getting kind of detached from real world problems. So we're always looking for real world issues and case studies. And in terms of an offer, we offer a lot of like friends and family discounts on actual infrastructure, especially because a lot of the time it's kind of a mutually beneficial relationship we're building as we're learning new use cases. So there's nothing specific, but definitely like talk to Kwaja and I. We built our initial sort of group of logos based on a lot of these design partnerships and relationships. And we're actually working on a third product line related to storage, some more durable storage, durable caching. So would love to find more partners in that space as well.
Great. And then, yeah, we'll also have links to any contact information or anything that you share later as well in the show notes. So people can also go there as well. And yeah,
Awesome.
with that, we've come to the end of the show. Daniela, thank you so much. I've had a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah, this was great. I hope everyone enjoyed listening, watching as well. And see you around, Kevin. Thank you.
Hey, just one more thing before you go. Thanks for listening to this episode of Founders Table. If you like the show, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also consider giving us a rating as it helps others find the podcast. You can find all episodes as well as more information about the show at founderstable.co. Until next time, stay hungry.